Welcome to Audit Archive, where we run you through some of the most questionable and rather atrocious police encounters. Today, we're looking at a case where an innocent woman was harassed and assaulted by over 6 police officers trying to snatch her phone for no apparent reason. During the early hours of February 9th, 2023, 18-year-old college student Taylor Brown was brought to the Normal Police Department in Illinois for an interview about a fire that broke out at her Park Trail Road residence several hours before. The 18-year-old waited for the detective to arrive at the police station for about 40 minutes and then requested to leave so she could return home, as she felt tired. In response to this, the police officers promised Miss Brown that they would take her back home. However, despite promising Miss Brown to drop her back home, 3 officers then approached Miss Brown and insisted on confiscating her personal mobile phone, informing her that it was being seized due to the ongoing investigation into the fire. According to the Illinois Criminal Code, Article 44, Section 44-3A, which lays out the seizure of any telecommunications device, it is stated that any telecommunications device used in the commission of an offense prohibited by this code, the Illinois Controlled Substances Act, the Cannabis Control Act, or the Methamphetamine Control and Community Protection Act, or which constitutes evidence of the commission of such offenses, may be seized and delivered forthwith to the investigating law enforcement agency. Therefore, a subject who has committed any of the mentioned offenses shall have their phone lawfully seized with no formal permission from the department or court. But in this case, it goes without saying that Miss Brown was not guilty of any offense, let alone the ones mentioned in the criminal code. This tells us that the officers at the Normal Police Department had no legal right to confiscate or seize Miss Brown's phone. Also, it's quite obvious that Miss Brown was not under suspicion of committing a crime, as she was there to simply help out with the investigation into the fire. As the footage shows, Miss Brown was first confronted by a female officer, who immediately demanded Miss Brown's phone and went as far as to reach for it too.
It's not a threat. I've asked you several times and you're just going to go back and forth with me.
You're not giving me a reason as to why my phone is being taken.
So, the fire is going to be under investigation by the fire department.
Not a reason.
So, stop. Don't interrupt me.
What does that have to do with my device?
So, don't interrupt me. The fire is going to be under investigation.
Don't ever tell me not to interrupt you, and I've been this calm.
So, the phone's going to be seized. So
but why is what I'm asking you. I'm asking you a reason. I'm not being rebuttal. I'm asking you a reason.
So, if you would like to talk to the detective,
and what made this situation worse was the fact that this female officer failed to provide Miss Brown with a clear reason as to why she was seizing her phone. It was the officer's duty to first inform Miss Brown about the seizure and engage in a healthy conversation, rather than unnecessarily escalate the entire ordeal. Up till this point, there was an orderly disagreement between Miss Brown and the officers. And it is to be noted that Miss Brown was on the phone talking to her mother, who works for the Chicago Police Department as a detective. It can be heard that Miss Brown's mother told Miss Brown not to speak with anyone without an attorney.
Phone's being seized.
Do I need to come there and bring an attorney? And don't talk to anybody without me.
After this, the officer aggressively ordered Miss Brown to hang up the phone and hand it over to her so she could then drive her home.
We're waiting for the detective, so the detective's going to seize your phone.
No one told me any of this.
Okay.
You told me that you were about to take me home.
Okay. So I'm not going to sit here and argue with you. So you can hang up. You can hang up the phone with, and I can take you home. Yep.
As discussed earlier, the officers at the Normal Police Department evidently had no reasonable cause to seize Miss Brown's phone, and this is further supported by the federal Constitution, 4th Amendment, which states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. In short, this meant that no law enforcement body has the right to search or seize without probable cause or a warrant, and in this case, the officers had neither. Regardless, Miss Brown promptly refused to hand her phone over to the officer and requested to speak with the detective in charge, who she was initially waiting for. However, the officer told Miss Brown that they wouldn't be doing anything like that, implying that Miss Brown was not allowed to speak with the detective.
Can I talk to him first? Can he come down here? Because
Nope, we're not going to do that. So you can hang up the phone or I'm going to take the phone. That's how this is going to work.
Oh, absolutely.
So
she said hang up the phone and they're going to take the phone because at this point I'm being threatened.
Ms. Brown is also heard asking the officer multiple times as to why her phone was being seized.
In a second, I want to take it.
I'm asking you. I'm
so
asking you a reason. I'm not being rebuttal. I'm asking you a reason.
But the only reason Ms. Brown received at the time was that there was an investigation into the fire.
So the fire is going to be under investigation.
That's fine.
Which we now understand wasn't enough to lawfully seize or search Ms. Brown's property. As this went on, the officer suddenly gave Ms. Brown an option to speak with the detective, something the officer said was not allowed just before this.
If you would like to talk to the detective that is seizing it, you can. Do you wish to talk to him?
Yeah, but...
Do you want to give an interview?
However, the officer then promptly switched to a completely different question, asking Ms. Brown if she was willing to give the interview or not.
Are you going to talk to the detective and provide an interview? Yes or no?
At this point, it appears that the officer was trying to verbally manipulate the situation and get Ms. Brown to give the interview, disguising it as just having a word with the detective. As unbelievable and unnecessary as this situation already was, the officer then finally told Ms. Brown that she had no idea why her phone was being seized.
Is that with or without the phone?
Without the phone. The phone's being seized. Are you talking to the detective or no? I don't know.
This yet again proved that the Normal Police Department had no reasonable cause to seize Ms. Brown's phone, and that she was simply being harassed, possibly because she refused to give the interview after waiting 40 minutes. The U.S. Supreme Court in 2014 emphasized the protection of cell phones in Riley v. California by ruling that the warrantless search and seizure of the digital contents of a cell phone during an arrest is unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. And as we know, Ms. Brown was not under arrest, so a warrant for the search and seizure of her phone was out of the question, further proving that Ms. Brown was not legally bound to give her phone away to the officer. The officer once again asked Ms. Brown whether she'd be willing to give the interview, but Ms. Brown wanted to know if that would mean she could keep her phone. In response, the officers made it clear that Ms. Brown's consent to the interview had no connection to whether Ms. Brown's phone would be seized or not, stating that Ms. Brown's phone would be seized no matter what.
So the question is, are you going to provide an interview?
No.
No? Okay. Go ahead and hand me the phone.
I have to know if my phone is being seized.
Go ahead and hand me the phone.
Upon hearing this, Ms. Brown made it clear that she would not give the interview and was immediately approached by all three officers present on the scene. The female officer attempted to snatch Ms. Brown's phone from her hand and then proceeded to restrain Ms. Brown by grabbing her arms. Amidst this, Ms. Brown was tackled to the ground by the second officer, who then also tried to take Ms. Brown's phone from her.
Go ahead and hand me the phone. Do not kick. Okay, push your legs out. Stop. Relax. Relax.
Mom, I'm not letting go. I promise.
Relax.
Mom, I'm not letting go.
To make matters worse, the third officer took control of Ms. Brown's legs, grabbing and restraining them. The three officers claimed that all they wanted was her phone.
We just want your phone, that's it.
We just want your phone.
They're trying to give me no protection.
As this went on, Ms. Brown retaliated against the unlawful attempts, not only to place her in handcuffs, but also to essentially steal her personal property. This is a good time to remember that Ms. Brown had done nothing wrong, and the officers still had zero probable cause that would permit them to lawfully detain Ms. Brown and confiscate her phone. So, it was not unruly for Ms. Brown to retaliate and stand up for her constitutional rights, which were blatantly being violated by the officers. It also goes without saying that all of this could have been avoided if the officers respected Ms. Brown's rights instead of trying to intimidate her into complying with the demands. During the scuffle, Ms. Brown continued to hold onto her phone and refused to let the officers get their hands on it. As the officers struggled to gain control over Ms. Brown's hands, the second officer on the scene employed one of the many law enforcement tactics that are taught to help officers gain compliance from resisting suspects. As the body camera footage from the second officer suggests, both the officers' hands are positioned at Ms. Brown's neck, which is often the area targeted where tactical pressure is applied.
Give me.
According to an article published by the police magazine, it stated that there are pressure-sensitive areas on the body that can cause pain and/or become distractors when triggered, and thus can be used when attempting to arrest an active resistor or aggressive assailant. The article also states that such police tactics are used to cause pain, to direct, or to distract. One could argue whether such police tactics were required to be employed on a subject that has done nothing illegal to begin with. Regardless, the pressure point being targeted in this instance is the brachial plexus clavicle notch, otherwise known as the area surrounding the collarbone. Another article published by the police magazine describes its effectiveness, stating that activating this pressure point would encourage a resistive subject to sit down when refusing and resisting. Yet again, one could argue that this technique was not suitable for this specific situation. Meanwhile, 3 more officers showed up, and the surveillance footage shows a total of 6 officers trying to restrain one 18-year-old woman who had done nothing wrong. The detective can also be seen standing by the officers during the scuffle. After Miss Brown was placed in handcuffs and lifted from the ground, she was told by the detective that her phone was being seized by him, and then asked if she was willing to give the interview. After refusing once again and telling the detective she wanted a lawyer present with her, the detective arrogantly told the officers to take her to jail and simply walked away.
Are you willing to provide a statement or no?
What does that mean?
Are you going to talk to me if we go back there or no?
You are forcing me to.
I'm asking you if you're going to provide
But you're
a statement.
forcing me to.
I can't force you to talk.
You're taking my items.
I'm seizing this for now, yes.
What does that mean?
Do you want to provide a statement?
My detective, I need to talk to her. I need an attorney present.
Okay.
I need a lawyer.
You can take her to jail.
All right.
Take me to
Where's her
jail.
property?
When asked why she was being arrested, the female officer told Miss Brown that she was being charged with resisting arrest and aggravated battery of a police officer.
Whatever charges you guys have.
You have resisting and aggravated battery of a police officer.
Oh my God! Okay, I'll do the interview.
Under the 720 Illinois compiled statute 531-1, the criminal charge of resisting or obstructing a peace officer, firefighter, or correctional institution employee is when an individual commits the crime of resisting arrest if they knowingly obstruct the performance by a peace officer, firefighter, or correctional institution employee of any authorized act within his or her official capacity. Since resisting arrest is a Class A misdemeanor, it is punishable by up to 1 year in jail, a $2,500 fine, or both. A sentence of supervision is not available for this crime, making the minimum sentence a conviction, which will create a permanent record that cannot be expunged. The statute additionally requires that anyone convicted of the crime be incarcerated for at least 48 hours and perform no less than 100 hours of community service. Meanwhile, under the 720 Illinois compiled statute 5/12-3.05, a person commits aggravated battery of a police officer if the person 1. Causes great bodily harm or permanent disability or disfigurement to another person, knowing them to be a police officer. 2. Commits the battery against the victim because the person knows the victim to be a police officer. 3. Uses a gun other than a machine gun and causes injury to another person, knowing him or her to be a police officer. The severity of a charge for aggravated battery of a police officer can vary between Class X, Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3 felony, depending on the specific conduct described in the charging document. A person charged with this felony could face anywhere from 2 years to 60 years in prison. Taking these facts into account, it becomes pretty clear that justifying these charges against Miss Brown would be rather difficult for the officers, and this later turned out to be true. Miss Brown was transported to the McLean County Jail, where she was stripped down for a contraband search and then released approximately 2 hours later with no charges. Her phone was also returned to her after the Normal Police Department failed to obtain a warrant for the seizure. Weeks later, Miss Brown filed a civil lawsuit against the police officers for arresting her without probable cause. Miss Brown's attorney, Abby D. Bakos, claimed that Miss Brown's Fourth Amendment rights were violated and that she was left with bruises, cuts to her wrists, sore muscles, and emotional trauma during her arrest. Miss Brown added that the officers violated her rights when they took her phone without either a search warrant or probable cause. Ms. Brown is now seeking an award of reasonable compensatory and punitive damages plus costs. During an interview with local media outlet 25 News, Ms. Brown and her mother discussed their thoughts as this entire ordeal unfolded that night. Ms. Brown said that, "In that moment, I feel like I was alone. It's all of them. It's a community of them. And it's me standing alone in this situation." Ms. Brown's mother stated that Ms. Brown has been going through a lot. This was a very traumatic experience for her. And I just don't want any other mother to have to experience this. The civil lawsuit is still pending, and Ms. Brown has been working with a therapist to recover from the trauma she endured on February 9, 2023. Be sure to check out our previous video, where we cover another outrageous police encounter.